All right, so things are getting really messy over in Ukraine. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into what happens when North Korea potentially joins Russia's side in the war.
Yeah, it's definitely a concerning development. North Korea is really well known for being very unpredictable and keeping to themselves. So to see them, potentially joining such a major global conflict is certainly something that we need to look into.
Yeah, for sure. And for today's deep dive, we're going to be primarily looking at a Fox News article that came out on October 30th, 2024. The title is Pentagon Threatens No New Limits on Ukraine Weapons If North Korea Joins Russia's War. So let's get right into it.
So the Pentagon is saying that around 10,000 North Korean troops have entered into Russia, and some have already been spotted in the Kursk region near the Ukrainian border.
Okay, so the Kursk region, that's right on the border of Ukraine, right?
Yeah, and it's been an important staging area for Russian forces since the beginning of the war.
So 10,000 troops. I mean, that's a lot of soldiers, but does that really change the math in a war this big?
That's the question, isn't it? It's certainly not an insignificant number, but it's not huge compared to the numbers already involved in the war.
Hmm.
But we have to consider that Russia might be having some manpower issues. So,
Huh.
even a smaller number of troops could be a big help to them.
Yeah, and how sure are we about this number? I mean, does the Pentagon know for a fact that it's 10,000 troops? Could it be more? Could it even be less? Where are they even getting this information?
Well, it's important to remember that, a lot of this is based on intelligence.
Hmm.
And, with intelligence, there can always be some uncertainty, and there's always the potential for bias. The Pentagon might be, playing up the North Korean involvement to, try and get more support for Ukraine, or maybe they're downplaying it to, try and avoid escalating things. We just don't really know for sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's just say for the sake of argument that this number is right.
Yeah.
What is North Korea even doing getting involved in this conflict? I mean, what's in it for them?
Well, one very likely reason is that, Russia might be paying them. North Korea's economy has been really struggling, so they could probably really use the money. But I think it's probably more than just about money.
Yeah, what else could it be? I mean, it seems like a pretty big risk for them to get involved in a war on another continent.
Yeah, definitely. Well, North Korea and Russia have been getting a lot closer lately, and, I think North Korea sees Russia as an important partner in pushing back against the U.S. and its allies.
So you're saying it's like they're choosing sides in this kind of global power struggle?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And, North Korea's military hasn't really been tested in a modern war. So this could be a chance for them to get some real-world combat experience and see how their troops and their weapons perform.
That's kind of scary, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it really raises the stakes of the conflict when you think about it like that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so imagine for a second that you are, a Ukrainian citizen living in Kyiv.
Yeah.
How would you feel about North Korean troops joining the fight against you?
Um, I imagine it would be very unsettling. No one wants to see more enemy troops showing up. But at the same time, Ukrainians have already been fighting a much larger Russian force for, quite a while now. And they've shown that they are, incredibly resilient. I don't think they're going to give up easily.
Right. And the U.S. has made it pretty clear that they're going to continue supporting Ukraine. A Pentagon has said that they're not going to limit what weapons they give Ukraine, even if those weapons end up being used against North Korean soldiers.
Right. And that's a big deal because it's basically the U.S. saying that they see North Korea as, being directly involved in the war as a combatant. And that's a pretty aggressive stance to take, and it could lead to, further escalation.
So when we hear that word co-belligerent being used, what does that actually mean? Like, what are the implications of that?
Um, well, it basically means that the U.S. is saying that North Korea is, a full participant in this war, and they're going to treat them accordingly. And that raises the possibility of, a direct confrontation between the U.S. and North Korea, which would be incredibly dangerous. It also makes you wonder, what this means for other countries that might be thinking about helping Russia, like China, for example. Do you think this will make them more likely to get involved or less likely?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like opening Pandora's box, right? It just adds another layer of complexity and uncertainty to the situation.
Exactly. And, if China sees North Korea getting involved and not really facing any consequences, they might be more likely to do the same thing, which could really change the balance of power in the region and maybe even lead to, a much bigger conflict.
Yeah. So we've talked about the impact on the war in Ukraine, but what about the bigger picture? Like, how could this affect alliances and the balance of power around the world?
Well, I think we could see alliances, getting even stronger on both sides. The U.S. and its allies in NATO might, increase their military presence in Europe and Asia. And on the other hand, Russia might get closer to China and other countries that are, not aligned with the West. It's possible that we could see the world become, more divided and more polarized, almost like a new Cold War.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And the Pentagon is saying that Russia needing to rely on other countries for troops shows that they're having problems with manpower and, casualties in Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's a sign that Russia is, really struggling in the war. They're having to turn to North Korea for help, which is, not really known for having a strong military. I think it suggests that they're, getting desperate.
It makes you wonder, how long they can keep fighting if they're already at the point where they need help from North Korea.
Right. It's not a good sign for them.
Mm.
They might be able to make some progress in the short term, but in the long run, it's going to be hard for them to sustain the war effort if they're alienating potential allies and becoming more reliant on, a regime like North Korea.
Yeah.
And it's definitely hurting their economy.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about Russia, but what about North Korea? What do you think their goals are here? What's their end game?
That's a good question, and it's hard to say for sure. North Korea is very secretive and unpredictable. Maybe they're just happy to play a supporting role and get paid for it. Or maybe they're hoping to get something else out of this, like, concessions from the West, or maybe access to more advanced weapons technology from Russia.
Yeah, it's tough to know what they're thinking.
Exactly. There are just so many unknowns when it comes to North Korea.
And with so many powerful countries involved and with, nuclear weapons in the mix, it's pretty scary to think about how easily things could go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Any kind of miscalculation or accident could be catastrophic. And then you have to think about, the broader impact on the world. All this tension between the major powers could make it harder to address global problems like climate change and pandemics.
It feels like the whole world is watching and waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah, it's a very tense situation, and it really shows how quickly things can change in geopolitics.
All right, so we've talked about the possibility of the war escalating, the impact on global alliances and what Russia and North Korea might be trying to get out of this. But let's zoom out a little bit and think about the long-term consequences. How could this change the world even after the war in Ukraine is over?
That's a great question. Could this embolden other countries to act aggressively? Or will it be a wake-up call? Will it lead to a new Cold War? Or will it push countries to find ways to cooperate and reduce tensions?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and honestly, it's a little bit overwhelming. But do you think there's any chance that something good could come out of all of this? Or is it all bad news?
Well, it's definitely a challenging situation, but I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Sometimes crises can force people to change and adapt.
Okay, so you're saying like maybe some good could come out of this?
Yeah, maybe. It could force countries to rethink their alliances and how they protect themselves. Maybe NATO will get stronger, or maybe we'll see new partnerships forming between countries that want to work together on security issues. And maybe this crisis will encourage countries to invest more in diplomacy and finding peaceful solutions to conflicts.
Yeah, maybe it'll be like a wake-up call.
Right. And when countries are facing a common threat, they often find ways to cooperate.
So what can we do like as individuals? I mean, this is all pretty overwhelming.
Well, the most important thing is to stay informed. Read news from different sources so you can get different perspectives, and be careful about propaganda and misinformation. It's important to think critically, question things, and don't just believe everything you hear.
Yeah, do your own research.
Exactly. And, things are changing all the time in this situation. What we know today might be different tomorrow. So be ready to, adjust your understanding as new information comes out, and don't be afraid to change your mind about things.
Well, this has certainly been a lot to take in. I think we can all agree that North Korea potentially joining the war in Ukraine really changes things and makes an already complicated situation even more complicated. It just goes to show how interconnected the world is and how something happening in one part of the world can affect everyone.
Definitely. And it's a reminder that we need to be, paying attention and thinking about these issues. We all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked about a lot today, what Russia and North Korea might be hoping to gain the risk that the war could escalate and, the potential long-term consequences for everyone. But as we wrap up here, I want to leave you with a question to think about. What do you think the future holds? Will this crisis lead to a more divided and dangerous world, or will it be an opportunity for positive change? Only time will tell, but the choices we make today will have a big impact on what the world looks like tomorrow.
That's a great point. So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And until next time, keep diving deep.